December 16th, 2008. The Federal Reserve cut interest rates all the way to zero. Almost nobody outside of Wall Street really noticed. But that one decision quietly rewrote how wealth gets built in this country. For most of the last century, the rules were simple enough to fit on an index card. You worked, you earned a wage, you saved part of it. The bank paid you interest, around 5% on a savings account. You bought a house, paid it down, and that house held your family's wealth. Money in the bank was supposed to grow on its own. That was the deal for your parents and their parents. Then Lehman Brothers collapsed on September 15th, 2008, and the whole machine froze. Credit stopped moving, banks stopped trusting each other. Congress approved a $700 billion bailout called TARP to keep the banks standing. But the bailout was only the loud part of the story. The quiet part came from the Federal Reserve, run at the time by Ben Bernanke. Bernanke did two things that had never been done at this scale. First, he dropped interest rates to basically zero. Second, he started printing money to buy bonds, a program called quantitative easing. Here's what that actually means for your money. When the Fed buys bonds, it pushes cash into the financial system. That cash has to go somewhere to earn a return. And with savings accounts now paying almost nothing, the money rushed into stocks, real estate, and anything else it could buy. Prices on those assets started climbing fast. The Fed's balance sheet went from about $900 billion before the crisis to over $4.5 trillion within a few years. That's trillions of fresh dollars chasing assets. And this is the moment the rules split into two different games. If you owned assets, you were about to win big. If you only held a paycheck and a savings account, you were stuck. Look at the stock market. In March 2009, the S&P 500 bottomed at 666. Over the next decade, it climbed past 3,000. Anyone holding stocks watched their money multiply. Home prices did the same thing. The median U.S. home was around $210,000 in 2009. By 2020, it had pushed past $320,000. So owning a home or a stock portfolio meant your wealth grew while you slept. Now flip it around to the saver. Say you did everything right and kept $50,000 in the bank. In 2007, that money earned you about $2,500 a year in interest. After 2008, the same $50,000 earned you almost nothing, sometimes under $50. The reward for saving cash got switched off, and while your cash sat still, prices on everything else kept rising. So the careful saver actually fell behind every year. This is the part most people missed. The old rule said save money and let it grow safely. The new rule said own assets or watch the gap widen without you. And the gap is not small. Look at who owns the stocks. The richest 10% of American households own about 87% of all stocks. The bottom half owns almost none of it. So when the Fed's cheap money lifted the market, it lifted those accounts. The people without assets got the headline, not the gains. They read that the market hit a record, then went back to work. And there's another group that figured this out immediately: big corporations and private equity firms. With money this cheap, they borrowed enormous amounts at near zero rates. Companies used that borrowed money to buy back their own shares. Between 2009 and 2020, U.S. companies spent over $5 trillion on buybacks. Fewer shares left in the market pushed prices even higher, which rewarded the people who already owned those shares. Private equity did the same trick with whole companies and apartment buildings. Firms like Blackstone bought tens of thousands of single-family homes. After the crash, they scooped up cheap houses and rented them back out. So even housing started shifting from families to funds. Cheap money flowed to whoever was already close to assets, and it mostly skipped whoever was not. Now think about who got left out of all this. A whole generation graduated into the years right after 2008. They entered a weak job market with stagnant wages. Average wages barely moved, while home prices and stocks ran away from them. To buy in, you needed assets. To get assets, you needed money. And to get that money, the old path was a steady wage that no longer kept up. So millions kept renting and kept saving cash, doing exactly what their parents told them to do. And every year, the asset owners pulled a little further ahead. This wasn't a secret. It was printed in plain sight. The Fed published its plans. The numbers were public the whole time. But it was wrapped in words like quantitative easing and liquidity, language boring enough that most people scrolled right past it. Meanwhile, the people who understood it acted on it. They borrowed, they bought, they held assets, and waited. Some of this finally reversed in 2022. The Fed raised rates again to fight inflation, the fastest hikes in 40 years. But by then, the gap had already been set. The people who bought assets in the cheap years were already far ahead. The savers who waited bought in late at much higher prices. So the question worth asking is not whether the economy recovered. It did. The question is who the recovery belonged to. Between 2009 and 2021, the wealth of the top 1% grew by trillions. The bottom half barely moved off the floor. Same country, same years, two completely different outcomes. And it traces back to that quiet decision in December 2008. The rules changed from earning your way up to owning your way up. If you held assets, the last 15 years were very kind. If you only held a wage, you spent those years running to stay in place. Nobody rang a bell when the rules changed. There was no announcement saying saving no longer works the way it used to. There was just a rate cut, a press conference, and a slow drift apart. Most people didn't notice because it never looked like a single event. It looked like an ordinary market doing ordinary things. Underneath, the path to wealth had been rebuilt around one word: assets. And the people who learned that word early are still ahead today. So before the next crisis hands out a new set of rules, it's worth asking which side of the change you're standing on.